What's up, peeps? So I saw this video by Muscle Monsters in my recommended tab on YouTube, and I gave it a watch, and so here are my thoughts. This is not a reaction video, so you're not going to be like, oh my god, like, oh, he said what? Because I've already seen it. And I thought it was good. However, definitely a few issues that I want to address.
Albert Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
I kind of agree, but taking an overly reductionist or an overly minimalistic approach at a certain point becomes counterproductive. So it's not like you can say, hey, just go lift and everyone gets great results. No, you have to have at least some details at some point.
Core basics that bring us the majority of our gains. Not only will this keep us focused on what matters most, but it will stop us from chasing new fads, hacks, or shortcuts that ultimately end up costing us in the end.
So again, I'm kind of mixed thoughts here. For the average person with pretty typical goals, I think sometimes making training a little bit simpler can be useful, but if you want to go further, you have to go deeper, and there is a lot of intricacy here, potentially.
If you make these movements the bread and butter of your weight training and focus on progression over time, you'll have a muscular physique in no time.
I mean, not no time, it's gonna take time. I know that's a figure of speech, but that's the most common issue that I see in terms of expectations. It's not necessarily that their goal is too high, it's that they think they're gonna get there in 3 months or 6 months, when in reality, the best possible outcome is probably gonna be 2-3 years, often 4, 5, 6 years. It takes time to build muscle, especially past that beginner stage. And if you want to look jacked, you're going to have to put in half a decade, often closer to a full decade.
Number 1, deadlift.
Good start, not bad. All right, let's see where this goes.
We were hard-pressed to find another movement that trained as many muscle groups in a single lift. The deadlift trains the hamstrings, glutes, lower, middle, upper back, upper traps, forearms, and core. Now that's a long list of muscle groups in a single lift.
Now, if I could only pick one exercise, it would probably be some type of hinge, and it would not be a back extension or a good morning or like a hip thrust. You want something where the bar is in your hands, a deadlift basically, because that's going to be working the traps through the stretch, the lats a bit to keep the bar close, as well as the grip to hold on to the bar. So you're just working more muscles for one exercise.
But if we were to choose one variation that would add to the long list of muscle groups trained in the deadlift, it would be the Sumo Deadlift.
So I find this interesting because I actually had a video out 2 or 3 years ago titled My Top 60 Hypertrophy Exercises, where I detailed what would I do if I only could do one exercise? What about only 2, only 3, only 6, only 10, only 20, 30, all the way up to 60, just sort of adding in exercises as I could. And my number 1 was actually the Sumo Deadlift.
Number 1 is going to be the Barbell Sumo Deadlift.
Mostly because it's easier on the lower back and you're spreading the load and you can spam it more. If you only do one exercise, you can't do something if it's going to beat you up too much.
We decided on this deadlift variation because of its great involvement of the quadriceps. And since squats are not on this list, this is the perfect variation.
So my logic was that it was easier on the body, but their logic is that it works the quads more. However, this is like quitting your day job to go sell Girl Scout cookies. I mean, I guess you can do it, but it's not going to be a financially effective plan. Also, it's a bit weird. Unless you're a Girl Scout, in which case, fair enough. And they do reference some EMG data, which shows that the quads are used more in a sumo deadlift. And yeah, that makes sense because there are more knee extension demands because the knees are farther forward and there's just more knee extension happening because you're in more of a squat-ish type of hinge. On that hinge squat continuum, sumo deadlifts are a lot closer to a squat compared to a conventional deadlift, and especially compared to a Romanian deadlift. However, it's just not a lot of quads, and he did not build his quads through sumo deadlifts. Not a lot of range of motion, no eccentric or very minimal eccentric, no stretch whatsoever, and so doing any kind of deadlift to build your quads is a really roundabout way to do it.
Other variations include Romanian, stiff leg, single leg RDLs, snatch grip, and trap bar deadlifts.
So I would consider this to be cheating, good sirs, muscle monsters, guys. You can't just pick 5 different variations of a movement and call it one lift. Like, 5 different pull-ups, 5 different deadlifts, 5 different presses, 5 different pushes. At a certain point, they're kind of just different movements.
Have deadlifts as part of your arsenal, and your physique will thank you for it.
So I agree. I think most people should have some type of heavy hip hinge in their program. The issue is that if you can only do 1 exercise or 5 exercises, spamming the deadlift, especially heavy deadlifts from the floor, is not going to agree for a lot of people. And so having some variation, some variety in your program by doing back extensions, good mornings, hip thrusts, single leg work, heaven forbid a squat, might actually be very, very useful.
Number 2, incline bench press.
Number 2 is going to be the incline dumbbell bench press.
How convenient. No, I think this is just a coincidence, most likely. If you poll a bunch of advanced lifters, like the hypothetical question of what would be your top 5, what would be your top 6, what would be your top 10, you're going to see quite a lot of overlap, just because the best lifts are the best lifts across a wide variety of people. There's going to be some individualization, of course, but you're going to see some pretty distinct patterns.
The question is, what's the best incline angle to use that will build the upper chest while still activating the rest of the chest? A study on 15 male subjects compared the bench press angles at 30, 45, and 60 degree incline. They found that a 44 degree bench produced greater muscle activation than at the 28 degree angle in the upper chest.
Again, so EMG is not going to be that relevant. I would say which exercises you feel best using is going to be way, way more important than some study on other people. We are all individual, we are all unique. It's not just going to depend on the angle of the bench, it's how you do the movement, it's your leverages, how much are you actually arching? How much are you tucking the elbows? What are the joint positions when you're actually doing the movement and when you're going closer to failure? If you're changing your technique as you go closer to failure, you're probably going to get different levels of muscle activation. So it's not just, I read a study, the study says this. You have to actually go into the gym and do the movements. By the way, this video is sponsored by Boostcamp. They are an app where you can log your training. I'm always astounded by people who just don't have any plan, or they have a plan and they're not actually logging things.
That was the plan. Not a great plan.
If you don't know where you've been, how are you going to know what to change in your program going forward? And trust me, you're not going to remember things for more than a few days. And so it's not enough to just know your PRs. You have to log everything. That is an absolutely essential resource. Plus, you get access to some of the best programs out there. I myself have 2 programs. Alexander Bromley has programs up there. Bald Omni Man, lots of fantastic creators. It's a who's who of who I respect in the industry. And so that will be an incredible resource on your fitness journey. I will link them in the description, so check it out. And thank you to Boostcamp for sponsoring this video.
Number 3, pull-ups.
Number 3 is going to be weighted neutral grip pull-ups.
All right, now we're 3 for 3. This is why, no wonder I thought this list seemed a little bit familiar.
There was similar muscle activation between grip widths for lats. Therefore, with similar muscle activation at the various grips, lifters can expect similar gains with a grip width of 1 to 2 times shoulder width. With that said, we would recommend the grip you prefer.
So I really appreciate that comment of you have to find your preference, you have to find what you like, you have to find what feels best. And I think a lot of their audience is probably a beginner at best or a complete novice. And often those types of lifters, and I know because I'm a coach, because I've created a lot of videos and I get a lot of comments and I read them all, people hate those types of answers. They want something very concrete. They want to hear, you need to do this angle. You need to be using this technique. 3 sets per week is better than 4 sets per week on a certain movement or whatever. They want to hear the exact answer so that they can just shut off their fucking brain, what little remains of it, and just do that, But training, as they said, is just as much an art as a science. And therefore, it's going to be individual, and it's going to take some experimentation, and at times, some creativity. So, good job on that.
Number 4, standing dumbbell overhead press.
So this is probably the biggest one that I take issue with, and we'll see why in a second.
The 4th exercise is the standing dumbbell overhead press. The reason we recommend performing this in the standing position is that it engages the core. The reason we recommend dumbbells is it allows for more freedom with the hand position.
So it's true that standing presses in general will have more core activation, just because you have to keep everything locked in, everything braced, everything stabilized when you're in a standing position. this is not really debatable. However, if you want to look jacked in the core, just jacked and stacked, meaty, dense, succulent, what's up, Boogs, in that area, it's less about the transverse abdominis, which is what you're using when you're bracing for a squat, a deadlift, a press, etc., and more about the rectus abdominis. So it's that six-pack musculature, or eight-pack or four-pack, whatever you got. That being developed is what makes you look jacked, and that is not being trained at all from these compound movements. You got to do sit-ups or crunches or weighted planks, something involving either flexion of the spine or at least anti-extension. So either flexing your spine or preventing it from extending.
There's also research showing greater overall muscle activation in the shoulders when done standing with dumbbells. A study
So they then spend a minute and 25 seconds straight comparing the EMG activity for the triceps, the biceps, the front delts, the side delts, maybe the upper chest, I'm not sure. I should have checked before I started recording this. Of the standing overhead press with a barbell, standing overhead press with dumbbells, seated with a barbell, seated with dumbbells, and this is really very much irrelevant. Having more EMG activity from a certain movement doesn't necessarily mean that movement is better. Often, if a movement is less stable, it might have more activation, but that doesn't mean it's actually going to be better. It doesn't mean you're actually producing more force. Here's a way to test if a movement is really good in general or not. How many lifters at the highest levels, either natural or enhanced, whatever you want to be, choose your adventure path, are doing that movement? How many top natural bodybuilders, because that's my path, do I see doing the standing dumbbell overhead press? Well, the answer is almost none, like pretty close to none. It's either standing barbell or seated barbell or seated dumbbell. Standing dumbbell just has too much instability, plus getting those fuckers up there. It's not easy. If you're seated, you can pop them up with the knees. If you're standing, maybe you could do some kind of shitty power clean, but as the dumbbells get heavy, are you gonna, power clean 100-pound dumbbells into position? Probably not. So at a certain point, it's just not a very practical movement, and I don't think it has any particular benefit.
While the overhead press with the barbell had a greater 1-rep max, we're going with dumbbells since the focus is muscle mass.
Again, it's this EMG-focused mindset that I used to have. I have core answers from 3, almost 4 years ago, where I am saying, here's your top 5 presses because this one has 3 more points of EMG on one person, and that means it's a better movement. Not necessarily. Like if you contract your chest really hard on like a squeeze press or something, you're gonna get pretty good EMG, but there's no stretch. It's just not a great range of motion, and so I don't use EMG at all anymore. I don't think it's particularly relevant. It's just not very important.
Number 5, dips.
So dips are an interesting choice. I guess the triceps are pretty important for looking jacked, and so I can't disagree there. However, I would probably pick some type of upper back movement like a barbell row instead of deadlifts, and then add in some type of squat pattern that you can spam, just because the quads and the glutes and the adductors, maybe they're not the most important for looking jacked, but they are just so much muscle mass in terms of potential that I think they're worth including, and the Sumo Deadlift is just not going to maximize your quads or your glutes.
The dip is an excellent exercise for building the triceps, which make up a significant portion of the arm. A big benefit of the dip, as opposed to isolated tricep exercises, is that it also trains the lower part of your chest, which complements the incline press we discussed earlier.
So I don't disagree with that. However, I think that having an overhead press and an incline press and then another chest movement is maybe a bit excessive. That's 60% of your movements, targeting a relatively small amount of muscle mass. So I think, maybe focusing a little bit more on lower body or the back is a good choice, but a lot of this is sort of personal preference and a little bit subjective.
Once you can perform 15 or more bodyweight dips with good form, it's time to use a weighted dip belt or a dumbbell between the legs and train the dip like any other compound lift.
Someone who is very exercise science focused might say actually, studies show 5 to 30 reps is the hypertrophy rep range. You can just keep going to 30. But I think in a practical sense, 15 is a pretty good recommendation. So I like dips in sort of 10 to 15 range, maybe slightly lower than 10, but not too much lower. And so, yeah, I think this recommendation is spot on.
So to recap, the top 5 movements are the deadlift, incline bench press, pull-up, standing dumbbell overhead press, and the dip. These are the top 5 movements we recommend making the foundation of your training. Of course, you can add more exercises to develop your physique further.
Yeah, so this is another good comment that I really appreciate. And I think having more than 5 exercises is probably a good idea. It depends on how complex you want your program to be. I would say at any given time in a given week, I'm probably doing 30 or so exercises, maybe 20, maybe 40, probably somewhere in that rough range. It's not 100 movements. It's not like every program is completely random or something like that. But it's not just 5 exercises or just 10 exercises or just 15 exercises. You know, like you can have 2 to 3 hinges, 2 to 3 squats across your week, 2 to 3 pushes, 2 to 3 presses, just to keep the body in one piece, to keep things fresh, to keep you motivated. And lifting is not that hard, okay? It's not like you're learning a new golf swing or a completely new task, or you're learning how to play the violin or something. A lot of lifting movements, especially when you're adding in machines, cables, slightly higher reps, etc., it's not that complicated, and so having more variation has very little drawback, but can have quite a bit of benefit.
By boiling things down to core basics, you'll always know which movements deserve the most attention when it comes to getting jacked. Did you find this video helpful? If so, click the like button below, as it'll genuinely help out the channel.
Yeah, so I will link their video in the description if you want to go check it out and drop them a like, show them some love. I thought it was a good video overall. I chopped out probably 3 or 4 minutes or so just to speed things up. So if you want to go watch the full video, there is still incentive to do so. So again, that link will be in the description below. Also, one thing that I think is important are sets, reps, progression. How do you put these exercises, hopefully more than 5, into a training program? So if you want to delve deeper into hypertrophy programming, you can check out my books. I will link them in a pinned comment down below. They have been very, very well received. I've priced them extremely reasonably. And so if you want to support the channel, you can check those out down below. Thank you so much for the support, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.